This is the fourth talk in a series designed to join up the arts and the sciences. It was first given on the 30th of November 2007 and is being given today, Monday the 14th of December 2015. It is a talk on the idea of history as completely systematic and the Iliad as an emblem of the system. The Achaeans will be seen as representative of a wild, northern confederacy of chiefdoms in a condition of tension with the smooth functioning established southern state of Troy. The action on the plain of Troy will be treated as an edge of chaos event as per the allegedly wayward theories of the Santa Fe Institute. The Iliad as pure physics. The big experts in earth sciences tell us that if you were to rerun the formation of our planet, the whole 4.6 billion years of it, all through again, but with different accidents and incidents, such accidents as those involved with the size, the time, and the impact points of asteroids and other space objects hitting the Earth, such accidents as those involved with having the bulk of the landmass in one particular location, currently that bulk is in the Northern Hemisphere, and such accidents as those involved with having the bulk of the landmass rising up owing to further accidents and contingencies of events occurring in the Earth's mantle. So these accidents notwithstanding, you would still end up with the same table of 117 elements that we have today, and that those elements would be in substantially the same proportions. Perhaps influenced by this type of thinking, and for reasons of their own, reasons that have to do with the limited number of biomechanical morphologies that are viable, some biologists believe that if you were to rerun the formation of the Earth's biota, you would end up with the same plants and animals that exist today, with the further inference that you would produce the same smarty pants biped, so-called Homo sapiens. In this talk, we are going to apply this things have turned out the way things more or less had to turn out notion to the problem of the last 5,000 years and the phenomenon of high civilization. And this with a view to suggesting that the Iliad is a representation of the systematized emergence of our species. Part 1, Theoretic 1, Nonlinear Progression, number 1. Explosion, proliferation of forms, or mess, collapse, consolidation. In science today, there is a dominant understanding that things begin with an explosion. 1, Big Bang, a physical universe begins. 2, the Cambrian explosion, complex life forms. 3, the Bronze Age, high civilization. 4, the tech bubble of 1999 to 2000, the information superhighway. 1, with the Big Bang, a physical universe begins. First there is an explosion, followed by a mess, followed by a collapsing of the mess, followed by a consolidation of forms, producing, for instance, our so-called solar system. 2, the biological forms found in the Burgess Shale in Canada at the beginning of the 20th century, and more recently in the Yunnan province of China, are evidence for a mass extinction that followed the mass explosion in biological forms that occurred 600 million years ago, usually referred to as the Cambrian explosion. 3, the early Bronze Age provides an explosion of high civilization. There are the well-known cases of Egypt and Mesopotamia, and the less well-known or less well understood phenomena of Minoan Crete, Oxus, Indus Valley, and Jiroft. 4, the examples of explosion followed by chaotic polymorphous forms, followed by collapse and then consolidation that we've given above, are a bit remote in time. So I've included in this list an event that took place in our lifetimes and is in very recent memory, the tech bubble. When the so-called information superhighway entered the consciousness of both the general public and more particularly the financial markets, there appeared on the stock market a profusion of infotech companies. All of these were going to be viable and were going to transform the world. In short order, many of these companies were trading at as much as 100 and 200 times any realistic assessment of their value. And there followed an inevitable disappearance or extinction of many of the companies and a slashing of the valuations of the ones that survived. The small number of those that did survive were left to consolidate and to seek actual viable forms. So, theoretic 1, in summary, a principle of physics, but apparently with wider relevance, explosion, followed by a chaos of forms, followed by collapse, and then a consolidation. Part 2, theoretic 2, nonlinear progression number 2. This is the second of the nonlinear progressions. Volterra's paradox, the Lotka-Volterra equations. Let's begin with a thought experiment. We have a lake which hasn't changed size, shape, depth, water quality in 500 years and has only been very lightly fished in that time by humans. In the lake, there are now, as there have always been thought to be, 200 prey fish and 20 predator fish. The prey-predator ratio is 10 to 1. Here is where the ratio is in some sort of stable state. One day, however, fishermen come along with a big net. They throw in the net and haul out half the fish in the lake. And as it turns out, catch precisely 100 prey fish and 10 predator fish. Sinking of the numbers when the fishermen arrive. Question: what will now happen to the relative populations of the prey and predator in the lake? Put more simply, which of the two groups will recover first? Answer: it is the former. The prey will reach 200 before, and probably long before, the predators reach 20. And why? There are a number of reasons, but the central one is that predation is a rather specific and technical enterprise. For their specific and technical attacks, usually of a short, sharp nature, predators need a reasonable propinquity between themselves and their prey. And in the now somewhat emptied out lake, there is an increased difficulty for the predators. They are simply too far away. A second matter is that predators often hunt in numbers and in a partially cooperative manner. Think dolphins, sharks, dogs, lions, etc. Such predation is not impossible in the now depopulated lake, but is much more difficult when your predator pack numbers are low. So back to our answer. The prey fish recover their usual numbers long before the predators do. Follow-up question: what happens to the number of prey fish after they reach 200? Who are tracking them over here. What happens to the number of prey fish after they reach 200? Answer: their number just keeps on increasing. There are not enough predators around to hold the prey in any 10 to 1 equilibrium. So the prey numbers blow out to 220, 240, 250. What happens then is that it is now free lunch time for the predators. Their numbers start to increase. It races to 20, then past 20 to say 25 and 30 until, you've guessed it, everything has gone too far. There are too many predators. The number of prey starts to sink. And the number of predators starts to track the sinking number of prey more or less proportionately. Eventually we are back to somewhere that might even be quite close to where we started. And then around and around we go. All this was discovered by the Italian biologist Umberto d'Ancona in 1925, while working on figures of fish populations in the North Adriatic. During World War I, there was little or no fishing in the North Adriatic. Towards the end of the war, there was a massive increase in the number of predators proportional to their prey. Nobody could understand this. D'Ancona got the mathematician Volterra to work on the figures, and thereafter we have the independently discovered Lotka-Volterra equations and the birth of the idea of dynamical systems in nature. Only 5 years later, in 1930, the term ecosystem is used for the very first time in scientific circles. So what did we learn from our thought experiment? First, that information about the fish in the lake being in a fixed ratio of 10:1 for 500 years was wrong, and that if people had bothered to check carefully, they would have found that the relative populations of prey and predator was fluctuating as per the dynamical pattern we've outlined. Fish do not sit down at negotiating tables and hammer out workplace agreements on their relative numbers. Secondly, we learned something far more profound. The only apparently fixed ratio of 10:1 is elucidating an important mathematical, biological, and of special concern to us, literary notion, that of the attractor. The 10:1 ratio of fish in the lake is an attractor for this system. The attractor is determined by the lake size and the lake shape, by the food available in the lake for the prey fish, and by the actual type of predator and prey we are dealing with. What their specific design is, whether they prefer to locate themselves in the lake, whether they are able to alter their diets, etc. Part 3, Theoretic 3, Civilization as a Co-evolutionary System. With Theoretics 1 and 2, we are hoping to cast some light on the whole rather murky passage of history from 3000 to 1200 BC, usually called the Bronze Age, and further to try to make some sense of the claim that everybody attending this conference has heard at some stage, namely that the Iliad and the Odyssey preserve memories of the Bronze Age. So, how do 1 and 2 fit together? Like this. We will use our predator-prey diagram. At A, the Bronze Age begins with an explosion of food availability, confidence, various cooperative successes, and a probable shakeout of predators, and goes up this way. And ends at B with a mass of predators in an inevitable collapse. But how do we get from A to B in terms of the actual history of Homo sapiens in our period? For this we need a third theoretic. We'll call it civilization as a co-evolutionary system. When you have a civilization, you have of necessity a delimited area inside which your fellow cooperating civilized people are going to be located. And this we designate so. Civilized are in here, not quite civilized around the periphery. Around the civilized will be affiliated areas containing either the uncivilized or the not quite civilized. And however unpleasant it may be, the civilized need to have dealings with the not quite civilized for usually one very important reason: obtaining raw materials. And raw materials can include human raw materials such as cheap labor, slaves, mercenaries, or even the occasional talented person. a master artisan, for instance. Because the civilized like the world to be orderly, they are disinclined to use a lot of force to get these raw materials, so they engage in trade to obtain them. And for the most part, they exchange for the raw materials the sophisticated manufactured goods of their own civilization. So for the civilization, the affiliated areas are both for resources and for the offloading of their own goods. Provided that, one, the raw materials don't run out, and two, no great degree of coercion is involved in the trade deals, this type of arrangement could last forever. The satellites, however, not really understanding the concept of the completely cooperative society and deciding that wealth of the civilized would be better off in their own hands, embark on a struggle with the civilization. And for reasons that have to do with the hardihood of provincials and the further circumstance that the hardy provincials might be being used in the civilization's very own armies, the not quite civilized can be well placed to prosecute their struggle. Part 4, the Bronze Age is systematic. Civilization begins in the south, i.e. the south of Eurasia, for people thinking about the Americas, understand civilization begins in the middle, i.e. with the Olmecs and the Zapotecs. The first acknowledged civilization in history is Sumer, which is located in southern Mesopotamia, and the Sumerians' own traditions hold that they themselves came from the south to get to Sumer, from Arabia, from Iran. Note, with regard to their own origins, the Egyptians also seem to hold an emergence from the south view. See Halloran-Simpson, 1970, pages 192 to 193. Quite early on, and for about 1,000 years, this phenomenon of first civilization becomes a settled coevolutionary symbiosis of Sumer with the northern city of first Kish and then later Akkad, with Akkad gaining ascendancy towards the end of the millennium. After a period of severe disruption, probably seismic in origin, a period in which there is a total collapse of the Old Kingdom in Egypt, a new phenomenon emerges in Mesopotamia, an Akkado-Amorite symbiosis with an influx of tent people, the Amorites from the northwest. Also, there is an influx of Elamites from the east. Then in the middle of the millennium, from the 5th century on, there is a major takeover by the mountain men from Ashur, the Assyrians. Further north than this is the emergence of the Hittites in Anatolia. Notice in this passage of history that despite some lateral coevolutionary merging, that there is an overall drift northwards of power in these civilizations. Civilization starting in the south and then drifting northwards occurs for two reasons, or two sets of reasons. The first reason is the location of established, efficient, smooth-running food production systems. These will emerge in the vicinity of a fertile crescent scenario, and more generally a high heat plus high rainfall scenario. I need to mention here by way of background that there is a growing move in biology towards the view that evolution is moved by food supply establishment. So 300 million years ago you have tall trees, and from exactly that time you have termites. 140 million years ago you have flowering plants, and from that time you have bees. Ergo, evolution is co-evolution, with the food source always the first step. The second reason, or set of reasons for the northward drift of civilization, has to do with an as yet unexplained tendency towards complexity in evolution. It is known that we started out as single-cell organisms and then complexified, but, independent of the Santa Fe Institute theoretics, we don't know how it happened. However, the overall picture of a unidirectional complexity can be gleaned from the ideas that have been presented in this talk so far. The tendency towards complexity is owing to the laws of physics. We live in a universe that has explosions. For human history, think proliferations, bubbles, fashions, fads, manias. The explosions lead to a freeing up of forms. The forms are left to adventitiously recombine with each other in new ways. Many of the resulting new forms aren't going to work, but some do. Hence a complexifying dynamic unidirectional universe, giving rise to a complexifying dynamic unidirectional biology, giving rise to a complexifying dynamic unidirectional world history. Part 5. The Iliad as an emblem of the system. A brief look at some attractors. 1. Appropriating women. Women in ancient literature are, generally speaking, currency. They function as exemplums for what men own. In the Iliad, in the light of the system we're advancing, the theft of Helen by Paris is a property theft. The theft effectively of wherewithal or raw material. The text of the Iliad, however, makes the idea of property theft quite a bit more than inferential, because Hector describes what Paris was doing in Greece as mikthais allodapoisi, 348, so associating with foreigners, but with probable commercial overtones. My English translation, it might be worth noting, has trafficking abroad. But there is more than the ownership of Helen at stake. Despite what tradition and modern movies think, the falling out between the Achaeans and the Trojans also involves Spartan gold, 374, 392. And later on we learn there was another stolen item, a peplos embroidered by the women of Sidonia, 6290. Note the nexus: women, goods, raw labour. So in short, we think that the theft of Helen is symbolic of a theft of Greek wherewithal and resources. What happens when the Greeks get to Troy is likewise, quotes, systematic, i.e. behaving like entities in a dynamic system, always changing, always slipping and sliding, but within certain definable ambits. There is a pronounced slippage in their stated objectives. The Greeks abandon their proposed goal of freeing Helen and avenging Paris's hubris in favour of endless exhortations to secure for themselves the sweet wives of Troy. Read secure everything Troy has to offer. So let's just make the co-evolutionary systematic explicit. In, let's call it phase 1, the southerners go on a quest for the raw materials of a northern peripheral area, taking what they can in deals with the locals. In phase 2, the northerners begin by claiming that the southern civilization has stolen their raw materials, but they are not looking for a legal settlement. What they want is an overblown revenge and a subsequent wholesale predation of the civilization's wealth. And the attractor? It's the trajectory of men impelled towards women and wealth. These they will never either fully attain or fully hold securely. 2. Troy is a cartoon of the Hittite Empire. Here the question of the Iliad preserving memories of the Bronze Age is up for investigation. The problem is, which memories are being preserved? It's a text that's got Lydians, Carians, Paphlagonians, Mysians, and any number of actual historical groups. But where, oh where, are the Hittites? The Hittites ran an empire that dominated Anatolia for hundreds of years, from at least 1650. But in the text they don't rate a mention, nor is it ever hinted that Priam could be a frontman for or vassal of somebody else. And this despite the fact that the Mycenaeans in Anatolia in the Bronze Age would have had nothing but dealings with Hittite vassals. Now, in the Odyssey, 11.522, the Hittites do finally turn up. Eurypylus' comrades, the Kataeans, or Kertaioi. The name of the land of the Hittites, Hatti, can be pronounced Kati, so these are presumably the men from Kati. But what I say about this is too little, too late. The Hittites have been expunged from Greek Bronze Age memory, and in the case of the Iliad, so have the inhabitants of anywhere else of any importance. The Egyptians, Assyrians, Babylonians. And the reason they have all been expunged is so that they can all be represented in one ludicrous cartoon. But the particular focus for, what will we call it, the non-remembering, is the Hittites. How do we know this? The biggest giveaway is Troy's location. By the Aegean Sea, close to the Dardanelles, presumably deriving its great Bronze Age wealth from control of the gateway to the Black Sea, And yet, no navy. And apart from the boats that Paris went to Greece in, apparently, no boats. No port facilities. No people living where the port should be. All this is to allow the Greeks to fictively take on an empire that was in fact landlocked and land-based. The Trojans even obliged by coming out of their city for no discernible military advantage to fight on flat land, on the plain of Troy. Further to this, you have a Troy which is run by an immured dynasty. As we know the Hittite Empire to have been. The Hittite king, for the most part, left wars to be fought by relatives, usually his sons, just as here in the Iliad. Also, you have the cartoonistic depiction of the dynasty itself, with everyone living together, the 50 well-married sons and the 12 well-married daughters. 3. The manifold, willful misunderstandings of northern males. First, we will look at the idea of normative predation. For our fictive Greeks, predation is right, proper, normal, what real men do. In the Iliad, everyone is familiar with descriptions, to give the usual situation, of Achaeans as predators hunting down Trojans as prey. So we will leave aside those examples. Let's instead slip over into the Odyssey to that interesting moment when Menelaus goes to Egypt after the war at Troy. It is of interest because, as we've just mentioned, the Iliad doesn't provide us with actual major historical southern civilizations. And here we have the cultural and political megastructure, Egypt, for the very first time. So, what will happen when North comes face to face with South? What will Menelaus be doing in Egypt? Bioton sunegeiron, gathering wealth. 490. What does this actually mean? Well, we are left to our devices in a shockingly inexplicit text. Does it mean he is going to get a fruit-picking job in the orchard of some wealthy Egyptian? No. I think he's going there to do something that he regards as about as natural as breathing. Rob, plunder, make off with women. His tactics will be somewhere between mild standover and heavy standover. A second example of this Mycenaean visiting comes in Odysseus' tale to Eumaeus. The story is pitched as a sort of generic tale on the lives of war-hardened Greeks. In the tale, Odysseus makes out that he is a Cretan who, having returned to Crete after Troy and with nothing better to do, gets together boats to sail for Egypt. Again, not looking for the summer holiday job in an orchard. But in Egypt, the robbery, murder and raping goes too far, which is a curious concept, and ends badly for many of his men. At this point, however, the northern male's predatory behaviour is revealingly linked up to a completely delusional state of affairs of the purest storybook kind. The easily won-over Egyptian lord finds the Cretan bandit so charming and so good at grovelling for his life that he takes him home and, along with the principal men of Egypt, gives him gifts and fates him for a period of years. This second example of normative predation, Odysseus' Cretan's tale, prepares us for our second category of willful misunderstanding, the northern male's persistent delusion of being a canny operator. The basis for this idea in the Iliad is that the Achaeans are better fighters than the Trojans. The entire Iliad is a cataloguing of Achaean military superiority. A highly emblematic moment occurs at the end of Book 5 when Diomedes wounds the war god Ares. With this incident, we are to understand that the Greeks are so good at the martial arts that they are able to defeat war itself. What happens next is again emblematic. Ares' wounding leads the gods to depart the battlefield, and there follows, at the opening of Book 6, a large-scale listing of Achaeans bringing down their Trojan opponents. Aias Telamonius defeats Acamas. Diomedes defeats Aculeus Teuthranides. Euryalus defeats Dressus, Opheltius, Aesepus, Pedasus. Polypoetes defeats Aestualus. Odysseus defeats Percosius Pidates. Teucer defeats Aretion. Antilochus defeats Ablerus. Agamemnon defeats Elatus. Lytus defeats Phylacus. And Eurypylus defeats Melanthius. 6:6-36. The implication is clear. If you could get the gods out of the way, these superior Greek fighters would have the war at Troy all wrapped up and in short order. But the war is not wrapped up. It lurches on for a decade and 18 more books. The problem of success in war is only solved outside the poem when, owing to Achaean cunning, the ruse of the wooden horse is tried and pure northern craftiness effects the victory. But the idea of the Greeks as canny operators goes beyond the notion of superiority in war. It extends to that part of life which is not substantively martial at all, business. The predator's cunning is here delusional from a completely different point of view. Here, delusional activities are actually a danger to the cause. The predator's desire to carry out advantageous business activities, read behave in a venal manner, is placing a cloud over the whole idea of commitment to a cohesive war effort and is putting the likelihood of a successful wide-ranging predation in jeopardy. Some examples. Near the beginning of Book 6, 6:37, Menelaus takes a prisoner, the Trojan Adrastus. Menelaus requires no military skill to do this. Adrastus is propelled out of his chariot, landing as 50 chance would have it right at his feet. Menelaus seriously considers holding and ransoming him. That's good business. And kidnapping and ransoming is a species of cunning highly prized by human predators. His brother, Agamemnon, however, intervenes. He fixes the systemic problem by chiding his brother and killing Adrastus. So with this episode, the reader or the poet's audience is being given fair notice that business considerations are a potential hazard for the Greek cause. The message is underlined straight away by Nestor, addressing the troops, urging that no one should linger over the booty till the fighting is over. 6:68. A second example explicitly drags Homer and even the whole audience into the systemic corrosive cunning. The exchange of arms between Diomedes and Glaucus. Again, the episode takes place apart from the actual fighting. Glaucus gives up gold armor in exchange for bronze. As a commercial transaction, we are told that this is the equivalent of exchanging 100 bulls for 9, i.e. it is a very bad deal for Glaucus. The authorial commentary on the exchange is significant. The narrator could have put Glaucus's action down to, say, being generous, but instead he prefers to go with being witless. 6:2-3-4. And Diomedes' participation in the exchange is therefore by implication full of wit. Here we have something much more than the whiff of venality and the potential to do damage to the Greek cause by keeping out a weather eye for the accumulation of wealth. Instead, we have a window of insight into the bias towards the north perspective of the poem. The author and the audience seem to be implicated in the outlook of the northerners. The author is alleging that the civilized southerners have more money than sense. In fact, they have so much money, they A, don't know what things are worth, and B, deserve to have it ripped off them. Could this, as a general precept, even conceivably be correct? No. But it is core delusional thinking for our northern type, the aspirational outsider. The very best example, however, of this delusional, mired in venality, predatory cunning concerns none other than Achilles, and as such is completely designed to grab our attention. It is an incident which is almost the last thing to happen in the Iliad. Achilles is praying to the dead Patroclus and says, Don't be angry with me for delivering the body of Hector to Priam. I got a really good price for it. 24,594. Glory is apparently commutable for hard currency, even at the highest levels. Notice, epe umoi a ekeia doken apoina. What a time for the litotes. I got a not unworthy ransom for it. Astute old me. Conclusion. We attempted the question of the Iliad as pure physics by beginning in part 1 by outlining a single model of a series of processes that exist in physics and more generally in nature. Explosion, mess, collapse, consolidation. In part 2, we needed a more detailed account of how anything irreversibly dynamic can be consolidated into something that a human eye would deem the ordinary course of nature, and brought in the idea of the Lotka-Volterra modelling for predators and prey. In part 3, we needed one extra piece of theory to indicate how a coevolutionary system is relevant to recent developments with the species Homo sapiens. In part 4, we outlined how all this applies very directly to the phenomenon of the Bronze Age, which after an initial explosion of unfettered high civilization produces a lockstepping of predator-prey interactions that drift northwards. In part 5, we looked at the Iliad itself as the system in action and indicated how the not-so-civilized Mycenaean chiefs interact with a smooth-functioning, serious dynastic imperialism along Hittite lines, and highlighted the overall perspective of the poems, the willful misunderstandings of a predatory Greek consciousness. Thanks.